Is not alive.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dean Hartley of the College of Public Affairs, and it's my pleasure to invite you to what has been our ongoing speaker series that we call Voices of Public Service. It's really exciting to have you. This is our second Voices event of this semester, and the program has been going for almost 2 years now. I wanted to say a little bit about the series and then introduce Dr. Ann Cotton, who is my partner in this series from our Schaefer Center for Public Policy, and also introduce our special guest today, who is Councilmember Zeke Cohen of the city of Baltimore. The Voices of Public Service series was created a number of years ago with students in mind. The idea being to invite leaders in our community, in our state, in our world to come join us and to do an interview with Dr. Cotton and I, really about them, about their career, about where they started, how they moved into the field of public service, and ultimately, where they are now. And it's been really, really fun. The other thing that I wanted to mention too is that if you haven't been able to make some of our previous Voices of Public Service events, all of them are archived on the William Donald Schaefer Center website. So this event is being recorded along with all of the others. And we're really, really, really excited to have with us Councilmember Zeke Cohen, who's been a tremendous leader in our city for so many years, but as you're going to see in this interview today, has a really interesting background that includes nonprofits as well as elected office. And I also want to say too to you, Councilmember, that you've been a really incredible inspiration to the college, but also I think to other leaders in the city and state. The ability of you to be able to make use of students and student interns to help integrate into your office, but also to serve your district has been really spectacular in it. And I can see quite clearly over the years that not just your team that you've hired, but also your interns have really added a lot of value to the people of your district and the people of the city. And we appreciate being one of those host sites periodically. And thank you. I wanted to turn it over to Dr. Cotton really quick for just a couple additional words, because this series is part of our Next Gen Leaders in Public Service series. And I know you wanted to say a few words about that, Ann.
I did. Thank you, Dean Hartley, and thank you, Councilman Cohen. It's a pleasure to have you here today. As Dean Hartley said, I'm Executive Director of the Schaefer Center for Public Policy. We do applied research and consulting for government nonprofit organizations, bringing academic expertise of the university out to help solve problems for our community. We also run the Next Gen Leaders for Public Service program, and this provides an opportunity for students all across the university to pursue internships with public sector organizations, including government and nonprofit organizations. So if you're a student and you want an internship, contact me and we'll get you set up. These are great paid internships. Councilman Cohen has one of our host sites. He has a couple of our interns and they've had a fabulous experience there. So it's a great opportunity. And the Next Gen Leaders program, in addition to the internships, has opportunities to help educate students about public service. And this is one of those events. So we're happy to be here today. And I think I get to go with the first question.
You do.
So the first question, Councilman Cohen, is how did you get your start in public service?
Yeah, and before I get started, I did just want to thank both you, Ann, and Dean Hartley. I will say that some of the best and brightest young folks that we've had come work with us have come out of the University of Baltimore, and particularly this program. And these are just hungry, energetic, smart folks who have been an invaluable asset to my office and to our city. And so I am truly, truly grateful to the University of Baltimore, to the Next Gen program for really being a thoughtful partner and a pipeline for young people to get into public service. And so thank you both. It truly has meant the world to be able to partner with you and to anyone listening on the chat, come work with us. We, as Dean Hartley knows, is something I'm really passionate about, is getting the next generation of young leaders into public service. I think it is a crisis in our country that not enough folks want to come and work in government and in service. And we have had just an extraordinary time hosting young people from UB. So come work with us. So that plug aside, so I got my start as a public school teacher here in West Baltimore. I taught in Sandtown, Winchester, and I tell folks I taught in a school that physically really resembled a jail more than a school. There were bars on the windows. There was no potable drinking water. The heat and AC frequently did not work. The conditions in the building that I taught in were really deplorable. And I remember thinking to myself, what message are we sending to predominantly Black children when we are sending them to places that look like prisons to try to get an education? And I think, unfortunately, far too many of our schools in Baltimore City and across the United States are simply inadequate for our kids. But the other thing that I experienced as a teacher was just this incredible sense of resilience and intelligence among the young people that I was teaching. I remember my first year and bringing a group of 8th grade kids to New Orleans right after Hurricane Katrina to rebuild a home. And I remember taking this group of kids, 5 of them, none of them had left Baltimore, let alone get on a plane, leave Maryland, go to Louisiana, but they did it. And when we got to the lower 9th Ward, we worked on this home that had been destroyed by the hurricane. And I remember the young people just having this incredible sense of pride. I mean, literally brick by brick, rebuilding this home that had been destroyed. And for me, it was kind of a light bulb moment around thinking to myself, here are these young people who in their daily lives have many challenges, are growing up in a neighborhood with a lot of housing insecurity and food instability, and where there's more liquor stores and grocery stores on every corner. And yet here they are in the lower 9th Ward helping someone rebuild their house. And for me, it was just such a perfect moment in understanding just the resilience and passion that so many children in our city see, and that we as adults need to do a much, much better job creating opportunities for them to participate in public service. Because in the same way that I love what I get to do and you both love what you get to do, it's the same for our young people. They want to contribute to their own communities and to other communities as well. And so from being an educator, I worked with a couple other teachers, started a nonprofit where we taught community organizing and civic leadership to high school students here in East Baltimore. Our young people were involved in passing the Maryland DREAM Act, as well as the Maryland Firearms Safety Act. But the whole idea, and it's one that I've really kept with me as a city councilman, is our young people need to have a voice in shaping their communities, in shaping our city, in shaping our country. And when we provide them with the civic engagement skills, with the ability to show up and effectively organize and help write legislation and lobby and advocate, that they can actually change the dynamics in our city. And so that's what we did. And that is ultimately what led me to run for city council in 2016.
Thanks so much. We really appreciate. I had a slightly different question from earlier in your career, and this will be of interest to some of our students too. You started a nonprofit organization called The Intersection. What did it take to start a nonprofit? And then what advice would you have for our students that might be interested or thinking about starting a nonprofit?
Don't do it. Just kidding. No, it was great. It was great. So I started the intersection, like I said, with a couple other teachers while I was actually back in grad school. So I went back to Johns Hopkins to go get a degree in public policy. And while I was there, myself and a few other teachers, former Teach for America teachers, kind of put our heads together and said, we've all been doing this thing in our classrooms where we are really tapping into our students' civic leadership capacity. And what would it look like if we did that more formally? And if we structured a 501c3, created a whole nonprofit around it, and led it together as a after-school program, and brought young people into the fold politically and civically, and got them engaged in community work and in political work. And so it was about a year of living on student loans and eating a lot of ramen, which was not the fancy ramen at the time. I know like ramen has become a big thing, but like at the time ramen was like 50 cents, little packet of soup noodles. But I was living on student loans, and what was great about it was that it gave me some runway to be able to prove the concept. And this is what I would say to your students is, if you've got a great idea and some hustle and some chutzpah and want to get something done, do it. Like, start by doing it. The thing is, a lot of people have great ideas. It's the execution piece that matters the most. And so our thing was, let's prove this concept. Let's show that young people can actually impact laws and legislation and community dynamics. And so we did. We spent about a year and a half unpaid, with no real structure, no board of directors, nothing, none of it. We just kind of built a program, and it worked, and the kids loved it. We were originally out of the Under Armour. It was at the time the Under Armour Center, which was on Fayette Street. It was taken over by Living Classrooms, but they were kind enough to just host us in there. And so we did, what we would call a pilot, and it went really, really, really well. And we were like, all right, let's figure this out. And so then started to recruit a board of directors, started to fundraise, and built out a 501c3, and I was incredibly proud to run it for about 6 years. After I went on and had my next career, they ended up merging with Community Law in Action, which is another youth serving organization, and they did this really good marriage of two nonprofits where it was kind of the best of both ideas. But I would just say that if you have a great idea, I think just don't let any barriers get in your way. Just go do it. Figure out, this is somewhat easy for me to say, but figure out the funding and all the rest later. Like, figure out some way to scrap it together. I think that people in this town, funders, are hungry for execution, right? Like, not just a great idea, but like, how can you actually get from A to B to C? And the other thing I would say, Dean Hartley, is, I think one of the things that made us successful with the intersection was that we had some really great mentors that helped us to build it, right? Like, when I was a teacher, I had a couple folks who were supportive of Teach for America and supportive of me, that saw what I was doing in my classroom and said, look, if you want to try to scale this, if you want to take it in this other direction, we'll support you. And I really cultivated those relationships. And so the other thing that I would say to your students that are tuning in is, like, be really intentional and strategic about building mentors and developing relationships with folks who are in a position to support your ideas and your work, because this city, Baltimore, is an incredibly networked, relational town. And in some ways, it is about who you know and just the social capital that you can bring to bear. And so while you're at UB, while you're getting this great education, be thinking about who are the people that can mentor you and that can support you to help you accomplish whatever it is you want to accomplish in your career.
Thank you. All of our nonprofit students will find that to be very inspirational. We have a lot of students at UV that are interested in starting nonprofits to impact change in their community. So can you tell us a little bit what it's like to be a council member specifically for District 1? And then what does a typical week look like?
Yeah, there is no typical week, Am. It is that is one of the things that is one of the things I love about my job. It's just the diversity of activities. Like you will be in the morning at today I was at a union trade fair, so helping Baltimore City and Baltimore County kids get into the building trades. So doing carpentry and electrical and IBEW, right? We have all these burgeoning trades and not enough of our young people going into them. And the irony is that these are great family sustaining careers, right? You can make a lot of money and not have student loans, but we just haven't figured out the pipeline. So this morning was over there helping them figure out sort of how to get there. Then this afternoon I was at a fire station, engaging and working with our great women and men in the Baltimore City Fire Department and trying to figure out a specific challenge around some our vehicle fleet for the Baltimore City Fire Department, which we've had some challenges, like a lot of places have, with the supply chain, with not being able to get enough trucks and apparatus. And my son, who is 3, absolutely loves fire trucks and loves firefighters. So every time I get to go over there, I always like take pictures and show him. I got to do this Fire Ops 101 thing that was like they took a bunch of the politicians and put us in basic fireman training, and it was brutal. It was not easy. We were suited up. We had like the gas mask, we had the heavy equipment, and then you went into a building and they lit it on fire, or they lit some hay on fire and you had to put it out, and they had to run up and down these stairs. And the whole idea is like give you appreciation for what firefighters go through. But it was incredible and it really humbled me. I could barely keep up. But that's what I love about being a city council person is you're really there are all these kind of micro challenges and macro challenges. What's great about the job is you get to do constituent service work, which is like help the woman on Foster Ave get her stop sign put up. And then you get to solve big, complicated problems like childhood trauma or transparency in lobbying, right? So like it is both getting to do legislation, which I find to be incredibly interesting, and also getting to help people where they are. And that's what I love about it, is that it's all the different things. It is never boring. Sometimes it is rough. Like people, you are the closest thing they got to government. And often folks will express their frustration at you, even if it ain't got nothing to do with you. But you are their direct line to government, and you're probably the closest they're ever going to get. They may never meet their congressman or their state senator, but if you're effective as a city council member, they're going to meet you and they're going to know you, and they're going to, with a lot of my constituents, we are on a first name basis. They call me Zeke. They don't call me Councilman Cohen. And that's a great thing because it shows that folks feel familiar enough that they can call me by my first name, and that, we have that kind of relationship. And that for me, just getting to serve and getting to represent just incredible, diverse, vibrant neighborhoods. I mean, I was saying to Ann and Dean Hartley before we started that right now the city council is going through a redistricting process where every 10 years, based on the census data, we have to adjust our districts. There are 14 single member districts in the city of Baltimore, and they're supposed to be roughly even in terms of population. Well, in the last census, my district grew by 5,700 people, which is incredible and a blessing. And at a time when a lot of the city, unfortunately, has shrunk in population, we are really proud of the growth that we've seen in Southeast Baltimore, in not just like toward the water, but in Bayview and Highlandtown and Greektown. I mean, it is booming and bustling. It's diverse. We have a large Latino population from Central America. We have Ukrainian, Polish, Greek, Italian, Black, white. It's just a great mix of people that live in my district. But because we grew, my district has to shrink to equalize with the other districts. So one of the challenges is who gets cut, right? It's a little bit like Survivor, like who's going to get thrown off the island. And none of my neighborhoods are happy about that. Nobody likes change. Nobody likes being taken out of their district. And so they're letting me know loud and clear that they want to stay the way things are. So, that has been one of the fun but stressful parts of my job of late, is balancing this whole redistricting process. But long story short, and there is no normal in this job. A lot of it is about constituent service. That is the bread and butter of what we do. But it's also about thinking about Baltimore's deeper structural challenges and legislating, using the power of the law to redress inequities that are longstanding in our city. And the last thing I'll say is we also have power over the budget. We have increasing power over the budget. We used to be able to just cut line items. Now the city council can cut and then add, so we can move money. And a budget is a moral document. It shows people or a city's values. And I think we have a lot of work to do to get our budget right here in Baltimore.
Thanks so much. And I can definitely see the stress with redistricting, but you got to find it kind of complimentary that people don't want to leave your district. It's different if they're going the other way. But the next question is really kind of a broad one, but I think it's going to be interesting to hear your response. And before I do it, though, I didn't want to forget to say this to everyone in attendance. Please, at any time, you're welcome to put questions to Councilmember in the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom or the chat. I'll monitor both, but the Q&A is a better place to put questions. So put those in and we'll get to them as we get to the end of our interview. But you'd already answered a little bit earlier what made you initially run for office, and if you wanted to add to that, you could. But I was going to ask next, for you, how has Baltimore changed in the past 10 years? And that can be either through your district or citywide, or metaphorically. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to share a little bit more about sort of my decision to run for city council. So this was back in 2015, and folks will remember that in 2015, Freddie Gray was killed in police custody. Freddie was a young man who grew up in Sandtown, Winchester, where I used to teach. Freddie, a lot of folks know sort of how Freddie Gray's life ended, but they don't know much about his life before his death. And this is a young guy, Dean, who was poisoned by lead, who was then swindled out of his lead poisoning settlement, and who sold drugs, and who just lived absolutely on the margins. And when I taught in Sandtown, I didn't teach Freddie, but I taught a lot of young people that had a similar life story, that were literally poisoned by their environment and then cheated out of any kind of opportunity for redress. And so that to me was just infuriating. There was sort of this moment in Baltimore where it felt like years of systemic inequality had just piled up and had resulted in this one young man losing his life in the back of a police cruiser. And I'll just remind, I know your students are very well educated to this history, but I will remind folks that in 1910, Baltimore was the first city in America to have legislated residential segregation into city code. That was later overturned by the Supreme Court, but we had racial housing covenants that barred Black folks, Jewish folks, other minority groups from living in certain neighborhoods. And those racial housing covenants existed really up until this day. There was one in Edmondson Village that my friend Chris Burnett tried to repeal, successfully repealed just a couple months ago. So you think about not just, in the height of Jim Crow and segregation, but these things have persisted. They're not legally binding anymore, but these things have persisted well beyond their time. You think about redlining in the 1930s and 40s, where banks colluded with the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, to only allow home loans, traditional mortgages, to go into predominantly white neighborhoods, and did not allow access to credit and access to a traditional mortgage in predominantly Black neighborhoods. And so you think about the loss of wealth, generational wealth that caused. You think about blockbusting. You think about the war on drugs, which we know in this country and in our city morphed into a war on communities of color. You think about this weighted history that we have around racial inequality. And in 2015, I think it all stacked up, and Freddie Gray lost his life in the back of a police cruiser. And there was just a real, really deep sense of pain and frustration. And folks know that whether you call it a riot or an uprising, that there was just a lot of anger. And for me, that was a real wake-up call that all of the political activism that I've been doing, working with students and sort of fighting the system from the outside, I decided, you know what, I'm going to try to go inside and change the city and the system from within. And so we ran, and I was really blessed, Dean. I was part of a wave, you remember, of 8 new elected officials. 8 out of 14 of the city council turned over. That's over half the body. That was the most turnover we'd ever seen. My predecessor was in his 70s. I was, I think, 29 at the time I got elected. So just a massive generational shift in leadership in the city. 8 out of 14, probably a median age drop of 20 years. I mean, just a completely different city council. And I'm really proud to say that I think in those 4 years after we all won, there was some really pretty significant legislation. We saw Councilman Ryan Dorsey pass one of the most far-reaching complete streets bills in the country, and also a really good bill around bring our Inspector General into the fold. Councilman Burnett did just extraordinary work on human trafficking. Councilman John Bullock passed a affordable housing ordinance that created a surcharge to fund our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Many of my colleagues were passing really, I think, thoughtful, forward-looking legislation. I was really proud to pass the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act, which made Baltimore the first city in America to have legislated trauma-informed care into law. And I'm really proud to say that I was just in Cincinnati, and they are emulating that law as well. They're doing a version of our bill. But we saw some real change. And it was also politically a really turbulent time. We had, as Dean will remember, we had a mayor who was indicted for a massive fraud scheme with several of our medical systems here in town. We had the pandemic, we had the ransomware, we had several mayors, we've had multiple police commissioners. So there's been a lot of political instability in Baltimore. To answer your question, though, I think where the city has been, where it's going over these 10 years, I think that Baltimore is still in some ways in search of its core identity. I think that we are an eds and meds town. We have some of the greatest colleges and universities, and I certainly count UB among them in the world. And just the concentration of brilliance that exists in our city, whether it's UB or Coppin or Hopkins or Morgan, any of our schools. We have them. We have obviously some of the best hospitals in the world. I'm blessed to have in my district the Port of Baltimore that remains one of the largest ports and one of the largest import and exporters in the entire United States of America. Of course, Under Armour is a big, it has been a huge part of our city. We have some big financial companies. But I think that in some ways, Baltimore is still trying to figure out its identity. I think that we are a city of doers and movers and shakers. I put our small businesses, our restaurants, our artists, our cultural institutions against any place in the world. And I think we come out on top. I think we punch way above our weight class when it comes to just the livability in our city. I was 22 years old and a teacher, and I bought my first house, and it was right next to a park, and it was great. It was a tiny little row house, but it was like rehabbed, and it was beautiful. And so this is still a place, Dean Hartley, where you can come here right after college, work as a teacher or a police officer or a public servant, and be able to buy a house and put down roots. Find me a city in America where you can do that right now. You can't do that in DC. You can't do that in New York. Most of the West Coast, the price of housing is just completely unaffordable. And so we have an amazing creative class in Baltimore. And I think that where we're going as a city, I want us to be a place where brilliant, resilient, scrappy, smart people want to come and want to do public service. And this is something you and I have talked about in the past, is I want Baltimore to be the destination. If you want to solve big, complicated problems, I talked before about our history of racial inequality. We can talk about deindustrialization. We can talk about white flight. We can talk about suburbanization and having this weird Baltimore City, Baltimore County setup that is unique to just us in St. Louis. You want to solve real problems, don't go to a think tank. Come here to Baltimore. Come work in the Department of Transportation. Come fix our broken roads. Come figure out infrastructure and the east-west subway, the red line. Come figure out a better bus system. Come figure out how to influence our schools. To me, this should be the place where smart, hungry, ambitious people come and stay and build a life and raise a family. And I've been really blessed to get to live that American dream myself. I'm proud to be raising my two kids here, sending my daughter and soon to be my son to Baltimore City Public Schools, and just having an amazing experience getting to live in this city and getting to serve the people that are my neighbors and are my community.
Thanks so much for that. Really, really appreciate that vision of the city. Anne.
Yeah. So you mentioned, Councilman, about the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act. What does it mean to be a trauma-informed city, and what are some of the challenges and changes that have occurred as a result of that?
Absolutely. So thank you for that, Anne. So I'll just start quickly with the backstory, which is that in 2019, there was a school shooting over in West Baltimore where a guy walked into Frederick Douglass High School at 9 a.m. in the morning with a gun, shot one of the school staff. And as you can imagine, this was just an incredibly chaotic, traumatic experience for, of course, the children that were there, but also the teachers, the whole community. You think about a school, Baltimore is a place that unfortunately we experience a lot of violence, but the one safe space should be a school, right? And so to have that violated, to hear from young people that they were ducking behind desks and listening to the sound of glass break out in the hallway and having to walk out and see blood on the floor from where a staff member was shot. That was just an incredibly traumatic experience. And we decided in the Education and Youth Committee, which I was chairing at the time, to hold a hearing. And the name of the hearing was Youth Violence, Youth Voices. And the idea was we really wanted to hear directly from students about what they felt we could do to mitigate their exposure to gun violence. And I'll tell you, Ann, a lot of the adult conversation at the time centered around, well, how do we make our schools harder targets? Like, should we have more metal detectors? Should the school police be armed while they're walking around? And what was interesting is that when we got into the hearing, these three students, they were juniors at the time, Damani, Jayana, and Brianna, got up there and they said, look, you all are city council, you spend way too much time thinking about how to better police us when you should be spending time thinking about how to prevent violence from occurring in the first place. And you should be thinking about how to prevent trauma from occurring, not just in this instance, but across our lifespan. And they named, in only the way that young people can, just very genuinely, all the different ACEs, adverse childhood experiences that they personally have been impacted by. So growing up without a safe, stable place to live, growing up in a neighborhood where we're dealing with food insecurity, dealing with a family member that's struggling with addiction. And they said to us, like, look, city council, that's what we want you focused on. And like I mentioned, I'm a former teacher. I started my career as a teacher in West Baltimore. And when you hear young people speak with that level of precision and passion and power, it just behooves you to listen. And so after the hearing, I went up to Gianna and Damani and Brianna and said, like, look, you're spot on about this issue of trauma, but instead of me going back and writing a bill, why don't we work on something together? Because I fundamentally believe that your lived experiences, your passion for this topic would help inform a better product than that which I could write. And so we did. We spent about a year doing a listening tour across our city in laundromats, in rec centers, in classrooms. And then a year later, we came back to their high school, to Frederick Douglass, and right there in their auditorium, they spoke about what it meant to have been through this horrific, tragic event, but then to have done something about it and to have really taken their power back and to have legislated and written legislation and advocated and lobbied. And then Mayor Jack Young signed the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act right there at their high school, thus making Baltimore the first city in the country to be fully trauma-informed by law. And I do want to just briefly mention, we named the bill after the late great Congressman Elijah Cummings, who is both a personal mentor and friend of mine, but also someone who championed this issue nationally. Folks may not know, but while he was chairing the Judicial Committee and prosecuting President Trump, Elijah Cummings held the first ever congressional hearing on childhood trauma. And after that hearing, he came back to Baltimore and he pulled a bunch of us together in a room at the Humanum Center and basically said, you know, listen, I'm not going to be here that much longer. He was very, very, very sick at the time. He had cancer. And he said, you know, but this generational curse, this issue of trauma, if we can't solve it in Baltimore, where are we going to be able to solve it? Because I am so tired of looking out my window and seeing these young people who are the product of generations of this disease. And like I said, Congressman Cummings had been a very close friend, a personal mentor of mine. He really had put his arm on my shoulder. And he, a couple weeks later, died. He passed away. He had been very, very, very sick for a long time, longer than most of us knew. And so we felt like the only thing we could do was to rename our bill in his honor. And so we call it the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act. But briefly, and to answer your question, it does three things. It calls for every city agency to get trained in trauma-informed care. It's really a deep dive, year-long training, just very intensive. We only hire Baltimoreans to do the trainings. Folks like Annette March Greer from Roberta's House, who teaches us about grief. Folks like Ali and Otman Smith, two brothers from West Baltimore, who teach us about mindfulness. We do these trainings, and then each of the agencies has to do a policy review, and they think about what are their policies that are or are not aligned with a trauma-informed approach. And then finally, we have a trauma-informed care task force. It is 38 people. It is everything from students to physicians to returning citizens to government people like myself. And we are tasked with coming up with policies and practices to make our city fully trauma informed and trauma responsive.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks. It's such a major opportunity and issue for cities and people and communities. And yeah, our College of Public Affairs and our School of Criminal Justice has been doing work in trauma-informed practices with victims of crimes for many years. I remember when you came and spoke to the Roper Victim.
Yeah, at the Roper,
Academy.
yes.
It was just a marvelous day, and we really appreciated you. Yeah, the next question is sort of a fun one, but sort of not. Depends on how you see it. But what are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced as a council member?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is that we are in the era of social media, and that can be a good thing in that, you know, people have access to you and you are able to, as an elected official, really tell your own story. I mean, I think certain elected officials have done this really well. Barack Obama was excellent at Facebook. I think, until he used it in really horrible ways. Donald Trump has been expert at Twitter. So on the one hand, social media is a direct way for you to communicate with your constituents. On the other hand, it's not always good. And it creates a feedback loop where people feel like you are on 24/7. And if you do not immediately respond to their need, they get frustrated and they feel like you're not responsive. And I remember in my first year in city council, really getting pretty neurotic about checking Facebook, and there's a Canton Neighbors page where they would always tag me on stuff, and it kind of got into my head, and I realized it was not healthy, and it was like impacting my mood and my relationship with my wife, and it just kind of would put me in a just not a great place. And so that felt not good. It felt like something where I needed to set some boundaries and have my staff take over some of my social media. I still post most of my stuff, but I spend very little time looking at it. My staff will read it for me, elevate the things that I need to know, and we respond. And we've taken great pride in being really responsive on social media, because I think generationally, that's where a lot of younger folks are. They're not emailing, they're not calling my office, they're tweeting at me, they're tagging me on Facebook, they're, I don't know, Insta, TikToking or whatever. So just figuring out how to effectively deploy social media in a way that is healthy has been a journey and a challenge. Other challenges, look, there is a lot of pain in our city, right? Like, one of the hardest things in my job is anyone that gets murdered or carjacked or killed, I try to make an effort to personally reach out to either them or their family. And those are really hard conversations, right? Folks are often sad, angry, upset, frustrated, feel like the city or the systems let them down. And I think to be an effective public servant, you have to lean into a lot of people's pain. And that is not a pleasant or joyful thing to do, but it's an important thing to do. I see my work in some ways as similar to ministry in that you are supporting people at their most vulnerable times and you're just showing up, even when it's hard and horrible and people are not well. So I think those are some of the challenges. And then I think Baltimore remains a very segregated city where outcomes are still largely determined by race and class and geography, and figuring out how to maneuver within that system and how to keep the original vision of justice and equity in mind at all times, while also realizing that you're in a system that requires compromise and where sometimes doing the right thing isn't so simple as you might think it is. It takes some real thought. I think that can be a challenge. I think people go into this work very idealistic. I did. And you realize that, these systems are not built for that you have to be really nimble and you have to figure out sort of how you can move the needle incrementally toward justice or toward equity. But it's not always going to be a home run.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.
Our next question is, what does your career in public service mean to you?
Yeah, it means everything. Look, I grew up Jewish family, the value of tikkun olam. So this idea that we are here to heal the world, to repair the world, was central to my Jewish identity growing up. My mother was a social worker. She marched for civil rights. She was part of the Mississippi Freedom Summer. She helped register voters. And my mom was really clear with my brother and I that you are not just here to serve yourselves. You are here to serve this world and your community. And that was really instilled stridently by particularly my mother. I remember we had a thing where there were times where if you had not read the newspaper, you didn't eat dinner. You gotta read, you gotta know what's going on. It's not cute to not be informed. And so for me, public service, I think, is how I was brought up, and it is how I try to live my life. And there's not, it's interesting. I don't know that I can really distinguish or compartmentalize my public and my private lives in that way. It sort of all feels like one part of one continuum. And I mean, Wes Moore has this thing where he says service will save us. Wes, Governor Moore, started the nation's first ever service year for the state of Maryland. And I think he's absolutely right. I think this idea of building our country's civic capacity is the only thing that will save these United States of America. We are a nation that is splintered, that is deeply divided, that is polarized, where even our notion of truth is divided. There are multiple sets of facts depending on where you get your news from, where you get your social media or your media from. I think this joint shared commitment to service is the thing that will save us as a city, as a country, as a nation. There's a lot going on right now in the Middle East. I have some family that is serving in the Israeli military. They got called up as reservists after what happened on Saturday, October 7th. And just a quick moment of deep appreciation for all of the families, both Israeli and Palestinian, that are caught up in this horrific violence that they're experiencing over there. But I gotta say, one of the things that I appreciate about Israel is that everybody serves, or at least almost everybody serves, either in the military or in some form of public service. And I think that creates a collective sense of identity where you are not just about yourself, you're about the larger idea and vision of your country. I think we've lost that in America. I think that we are too individualistic, we are too selfish, we are too fractured, and I think it's been really bad. I think we have, I've said this to Dean Hartley before, I think that we have created a situation where we have dismantled many of our social safety nets. We have made government unattractive to work for, to be part of. We did that to ourselves. And the only way to undo it is through public service. And it is what inspires me to get up every morning and do my job. And I just hope that for your students, for the young and older folks coming out of the University of Baltimore, that you all are able to find your pathway into public service as well, because it has been just an incredibly fulfilling career that I've gotten to lead. And I feel like I'm just getting started. I mean, it is a journey. And there are days that are difficult and dark, but it is such an honor to get to wake up every single day and represent the city that I love. Like, what could be better? You know, if you are someone who loves American cities, who loves complicated problems, who loves learning, there is nothing better than getting to do the work that I get to do, and frankly that you all get to do as well. And so I'm, again, just deeply grateful and humbled by the opportunity and the partnership.
Thanks so much for that. Well, we have one final prepared question, and then I'm seeing some show up in the Q&A, and there's some fun ones in there. This last question is related to a few in the Q&A, council member. As you know, we have a new internship program called Next Generation Leaders for Public Service, and your office, thank you. Your office has taken one of our interns each semester since this past spring that it was created. And I know that you took our interns in the past too, before that. So really appreciated. But generally, what value do you see to these internships having on the students, but also on your office?
So the reason we have been successful as an office is that we see these types of fellowships and internships as a huge force multiplier for the work that we're able to do. So if you come work with us, we will put you to work. It will not be, just sit here and do spreadsheets or whatever. You will be directly interacting and engaging with my constituents. You will be researching topics. One thing that I'm big on, Dean, as you know, is making it really mutually advantageous. I don't like to exploit anyone's labor. I want to make sure that it is that when you come and work for me, that you're really getting a great experience out of it. So we always make sure, and my chief of staff, Maggie, is phenomenal at this, but to say to folks at the outset, like, look, if there is a topic that you want to become an expert on, whether that's affordable housing or schools or, workforce development or whatever, let us know, and we will set you up to go do that. We will bring you into committee hearings. We will, if you want to learn about the politics, you can come check that part out. So I want to make sure it's mutually advantageous, but it's been amazing for us because it just enables us to do more work. I have like I said, a big district, a lot of competing demands, and having students on the forefront, literally picking up the phone when a constituent calls and helping that constituent get their street light turned back on or get the speed bump on the end of their block, that is just deeply rewarding work. I mean, and it is while you are in college. And frankly, Dean, one of my best former employees was a young lady named Miriam Ahmed, who UB student, started with me while she was at UB. got I think it was internship, fellowship in my office. She then went on and was like director of, I think, legislative affairs in my city council office. She had a full-time job, and then she became chief of staff for Councilwoman Felicia Porter. Now she's in DC getting, I forget which degree, one of the public policy or law, or anyway, continuing her education, but just an incredible young woman and contributed enormously to my office. And I say this to you, and I'll say this in any space publicly, the UB students that we've gotten have been universally great, and we are going to continue to partner with you all until you tell us we can't anymore.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it, and really great advice to students, and also about how you use student interns so effectively. And Ann, I want to brag on your program. The Next Gen Leaders in Public Service program last year placed almost, maybe a little over 100 paid internships around the state, local governments around our region. And as I understand it, you're working towards almost 130 by the end of this year, which is really just terrific. So keep up that incredible work for students. Ann, you're on for, I think we're going to the Q&A now, right?
We are. And yes, I'm very appreciative of the funding we receive from the state to support these initiatives, because it helps our students get these great opportunities at paid internships. Often only available to people who have other types of financial support. Unpaid internships are usually available to people with other financial support. So the paid internship really makes it available and accessible to a wide range of students. And we're happy to be able to do that. One question is from Rebecca Hoffer, and she said, in the time of increased social media engagement, how do we convert enthusiasm into action and have a direct impact on our communities?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rebecca. So look, I think, like I said before, social media can be a really good thing. It certainly can galvanize and energize people. It also can be a bad thing. There's a ton of disinformation. There's everything from COVID denialism to the political instability that Facebook and others have caused, to sort of the rise of right-wing nationalism on social media and Twitter. I think that using it as a tool to mobilize people to action is a really healthy thing. Like, I think doing events, getting folks energized and engaged, I think that it can be a really positive thing for folks who are more introverted, who are a little bit shyer. And I'm also a big believer that on some level, even though I'm sitting here in a Zoom box, we got to get off our computer screens. Like, we have to engage with each other in person and show up. And so I think that while I definitely promote social media and use it and try to be responsive to it, I also think that it can become a bit of a trap. And I would just encourage folks, use it as a tool, but don't let it dominate what you do. Really make the effort to like show up in person, be present, come out, engage. I think a lot of, especially like younger folks, we've like lost the ability to socially interact in some ways. And I get that. Like, I'm weirdly enough, I'm like kind of an introvert myself, but we got to be able to show up for each other. And we got to show up not just on Twitter, but in person as well. And so that's what I would say about it.
No, thanks. We have another question from Dr. Wyatt Nickel, one of our faculty members in public administration. So thanks for being with us, Heather. Dr. Wyatt Nickel mentions, please, remind me of your impetus to establish empathy training for public safety employees, and notes that we need more of this. Has there been some efforts on that type of training for public safety workers?
So I think that's a reference to the trauma-informed care training that we've been doing, which certainly has been with public safety workers. We actually just, I introduced a bill just recently that would include the Baltimore City Police Department in our trauma-informed care trainings.
Great.
And the reason we did that was when I originally passed the Healing City Act in 2020, we did not have local control over our police department. That has been a relatively recent development. And so I want to make sure that our police officers who themselves experience a great deal of trauma and in some very unfortunate instances have inflicted trauma onto our communities, that they are able to access these trainings as well. It is incredibly hard work to show up at the scene of a murder or when something has gone catastrophically wrong. It is vicarious traumatization, it is firsthand, it's really, really tough. We know it has a huge impact on officers' mental health. And so I wanted to make absolutely sure that police and firefighters were not exempted from this work. We know that unfortunately suicidality is elevated in law enforcement communities. We know that rates of alcoholism and addiction are higher than the median population. And so making sure that our first responders get this training, that we are taking care of their mental health, their needs, is critically important to how we build a sustainable workforce in law enforcement. I just fundamentally believe that if we don't take care of the public servants that are putting out fires and helping to reduce violence in our communities and responding to horrific scenes, if we don't attend to their mental health and their needs, bad things will happen. And we've seen what happens when police go rogue. We're under a consent decree for a reason, and we absolutely need to do more to make sure our first responders and our public safety folks are getting the support and the training that they need.
Thank you, Councilman. Our last question comes from Rodney Walker. He says, Councilman Cohen, with a newly passed law limiting terms for council that a council person can serve, have you thought of some other pathways you might choose to pursue?
Yeah, so right. Last election, the voters of Baltimore gave us term limits. So we get to serve 2 terms in any one office, and then you have to either move up or move out. What I would want to do after elected office. So, to be honest with you, a lot of my focus, I'm currently running to be city council president here in Baltimore. And so that has been like where my energy and my brain has been. Post my political life, I think I probably go back to teaching. I really, really, really liked being a teacher. It was pretty incredible. There's a world in which I would do some more organizing and advocacy outside of government. I've really enjoyed, since passing the Healing City Act, we've had a couple other cities reach out and getting to do a little consulting and supporting them to implement some version of trauma-informed care in Savannah and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and now in Cincinnati. So I'd love to do some more of that across the country. But yeah, I mean, probably when I get done with all this, I probably go back to teaching, either maybe at the college level, but frankly, maybe back to middle school. I really enjoyed it. It was hardest job I've ever had by far, but incredibly fulfilling as well. So I think that's probably where I go. But listen, I am hoping that I got a couple more years in me in the elected office department. And so, we'll see.
Thank you very much. Dean Hartley?
Thanks. I have a feeling you're going to be busy for a while. We'll look forward to finding some teaching opportunities. Even so, some people teach while doing all that hard work, and I know you.
One of my colleagues, as you know, Dean Hartley, Councilman Torrance, is teaching in your law school right now, and it's great.
Oh, he's teaching in the college actually, and
Oh, is that right?
course on constitutional law, and then Delegate Boyce teaches on legislative process periodically. So we'll
Right.
look out for you
Sure.
for sure if you and often has opportunities come up as well. We didn't have any other. Well, actually, we may have another question in chat, but let me double check. I may not have cleared that one. I didn't. Are you okay on time?
Yeah, I'm good.
Well, there was one that we missed, but I thought I always think it's a good one to leave on. Why should students consider a career in public service over some of the more lucrative careers that might be out there? And what advice, finally, do you have for students considering a career in public service?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you got to make it make sense in terms of the finances, but I would just say that I've felt really blessed to be in public service my whole career as a teacher, as a nonprofit director, and now as a city councilman. And it's not where you go to make a ton of money. Folks should be clear about that, but you can live a really decent middle class life. And there's a lot of loan forgiveness programs if you go the route of public service. And I just think it is an incredibly fulfilling, rewarding career. I have been absolutely blessed. I feel like I was not born in Baltimore, but the city adopted me and has really like nurtured me and developed me into the person and public servant that I am. And so I would just say to all your students, if this is something that you're considering, do it. It is so rewarding. It is so fulfilling. There's just nothing better. I mean, and then to do it in this city, because if you want to make real impact, Baltimore's the place to do it, period. Right? Like you can go do tech in San Francisco, you can go do finance in New York. It's fine, it's great. Come do service in Baltimore. It will make you into a stronger person. It will make you into a better human being. And there are so many opportunities, whether it's nonprofit, whether it's in government, whether it's for profit. It is just an incredibly rewarding path to pursue. And so again, I just want to put myself out there as a resource. I'm going to put my email in the chat. If ever, whoops, there goes my light. If ever anyone wants to reach out and come do a fellowship with us, or just if you have any kind of issue or any kind of question, always just let me know, and happy to be a resource. And again, it's been nothing but a pleasure getting to work with the University of Baltimore and the incredible scholars that you are producing.
Thank you so much, Councilman Cohen. As a closing remark, one thing I always like to say is that government is business, so it needs every type of profession. So you can pursue your intellectual passion and serve your community by doing that in public service, and we help with that at the University of Baltimore and through our Next Gen program. So if anyone wants an internship, just contact us at the Schaefer Center, and we can help connect you to terrific internship opportunities. And we're thrilled to do that. And we're so appreciative of Councilman Cohen, your time and your thoughtful answers, and for being here with our students and being here archived also for our students who weren't able to attend tonight. We really appreciate your support and your support for the city and your involvement in the community. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you both. This has been nothing but a pleasure.
Oh, ours too. Thank you. I hope you have a best night. And to everyone who's on this webinar, please have a great evening. If you're headed to class, have a great class.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Good night.